peace. It's something we all seem to crave, isn't it? Deep down.
Definitely. It feels almost universal.
And yet, look around, look at history. War, violent conflict.
Yeah.
It's just always there. It hits people so hard, sometimes directly, sometimes, well, indirectly. It affects pretty much all of us now.
It's a tough reality, that stark contrast between wanting peace and living with conflict.
Exactly. And that contrast is why we're doing this deep dive today. You sent us a very specific source to look at.
Right. It's an article from the Watchtower magazine, the September-October 2025 issue.
And the title asks the big question: an end to war hellway.
Yeah, and it offers a, let's say, very distinct viewpoint, grounded in his interpretation of the Bible.
It absolutely does. So our job today, our mission, is to really unpack this source's perspective. We'll explore how it describes war's impact, why it argues war keeps happening despite our efforts.
Its specific explanation for how war will end, according to the article.
And maybe surprisingly, how it suggests people can find some peace now, even with all the turmoil. We're just laying out what the source says, okay? It identifies itself as non-political, sticking strictly to the Bible.
Got it. So where should we start? The impact.
Yeah, let's start there. How does the source show the real human toll of war? Because it doesn't just talk stats, does it?
No, not at all. It brings in personal stories, really powerful ones. It talks about soldiers like Gary from Britain. He described this constant uncertainty, just waiting for something catastrophic to happen.
Awful. And Wilmar from Colombia?
Yeah, he talked about being shot, seeing terrible things, killings, even children and the elderly. He said war makes you hard-hearted. It changes you.
And Zafira from the U.S.
Her story was about witnessing someone shot right in front of her. She said those scenes, the sounds, the screaming, they just don't leave you. You don't forget.
It's heavy stuff. And not just soldiers, right?
Yeah.
The article includes civilians, too.
Absolutely. Alexandra from Ukraine, feeling like she could never be happy again, just constant fear for her family, for herself.
Or Dalar in Tajikistan. That fear of just standing in a food line for hours, terrified of a stray bullet.
And Marie from Rwanda, an orphan after the genocide. No one left to comfort her, she said.
These stories, they really hit home. They show the individual devastation.
They do. But the source then kind of zooms out, arguing that because our world is so interconnected now, war actually affects everyone, even if you're far from the fighting.
Right, in ways we might not always think about. It lists several broad impacts. Food shortages, for one.
Yeah, it quotes the World Food Program. Something like 70% of the world's hungry people live in conflict zones. Conflict is a huge driver of hunger.
Then there's health. Obvious physical harm, but also the mental toll, stress, anxiety, PTSD, and getting medical help in war zones, often impossible.
And displacement. Massive numbers. The source mentions the UNHCR stat, over 113 million people forced from their homes by late 2023. War being a major, major reason.
And the economy. It affects us all. Inflation, governments pouring money into military instead of, schools or healthcare, plus the sheer cost of rebuilding afterwards.
Don't forget the environment, too. Deliberate destruction, pollution from weapons, contamination, and landmines, posing a danger for years and years.
So the source pulls all this together to say, look, war is incredibly destructive, incredibly costly on every level.
Yeah, it establishes that as a baseline, a grim baseline.
Okay, so after painting that picture, the source then makes a specific connection, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Between current wars and Bible prophecy.
It does. It frames today's conflicts as part of what it calls the sign of the conclusion of the system of things. It draws that phrase from Matthew chapter 24.
And it quotes Jesus directly.
Yes, from Matthew 24, verses 6 and 7. You are going to hear of wars and reports of wars. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom.
And there's another scripture, Luke
21, verse 9. When you hear of wars and disturbances, do not be terrified. The article points out that disturbances in the original language covers a lot of uprisings, political turmoil, riots, insurrections.
So the source is saying what we see happening now, these widespread wars, this unrest, it's actually fulfilling these specific prophecies. It's a sign.
That's exactly how this source interprets it, yes, within its specific theological framework.
Okay. But even seeing it that way, the article doesn't just stop there. It then looks at what humans have tried to do to stop war.
Right. And importantly, why this source believes those efforts haven't ultimately worked. It acknowledges why people fight political reasons: economic gain, social change, land, resources, ethnic or religious clashes, the usual suspect.
Then it goes through different strategies humans use, like economic development.
Yeah, the idea being if you improve quality of life, reduce inequality, maybe people won't fight.
Makes sense on the surface.
Mm.
But the source sees a limitation.
It points out that this requires governments to fundamentally change their spending priorities away from the military. It gives a stark statistic for 2022, about $34 billion on peace building versus, well, that was only 0.4% of global military spending that same year. Tiny fraction.
Wow. 0.4%.
And it quotes the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, basically saying, we spend way more managing conflicts than preventing them. The source also adds its Bible perspective that human governments can help the poor but can't totally eliminate poverty, citing verses like Deuteronomy 15.11.
Okay, what about diplomacy? Talking it out.
The classic approach, dialogue, negotiation. The source says the limitation is often unwillingness. Parties won't negotiate seriously, or they won't compromise, or they make deals and then break them.
Doesn't sound too stable.
It quotes someone named Raymond F. Smith, who wrote that sometimes flawed peace agreements just set the stage for the next conflict. The source links this to Bible verses about people being disloyal, not open to any agreement, betrayers, which it says hinders real peace, even though the Bible itself encourages seeking peace.
Then there's disarmament. Getting rid of weapons.
Especially the big ones, nuclear, chemical, biological. The limitation here, according to the source, nations are afraid. They fear losing power or becoming vulnerable if they disarm first.
A classic security dilemma.
Exactly. And just removing weapons doesn't fix why people wanted to fight in the first place. It quotes a disarmament report noting many post-Cold War promises weren't kept. The source contrasts this with Isaiah's prophecy of beating swords into plowshares, but argues violence starts in the heart, citing Jesus in Matthew. So you need more than just taking away the tools.
Right, a deeper change. What's the last one? Collective security.
Yeah, the idea that nations team up against an aggressor. Strength in numbers, the limitation. The source says the threat of collective action doesn't actually guarantee peace. Nations often don't agree on when or how to act, or they just don't follow through on their commitments.
Like the League of Nations or sometimes the UN.
It actually quotes the Encyclopedia Britannica saying collective security basically failed in both cases. The source's Bible take is that while numbers might seem safer, you can't ultimately trust human institutions for lasting peace, citing Psalm 146 about not trusting human leaders.
So after looking at all these human efforts, economic, diplomatic, military, collective, the source basically concludes they haven't worked. War is still here.
Pretty much. It acknowledges the debate about whether the world is overall more peaceful now than in the past, but it stresses the undeniable fact that war and violence still deeply affect vast numbers of people today.
Which leads it to ask,
Right.
why? Why does it continue? And this is where the source really presents its unique explanation based on the Bible.
Yes, it moves beyond the surface reasons and identifies what it considers the fundamental root causes, three main ones. First, something it calls sin.
Sin, how does it explain that in this context?
It explains it as an inherited imperfection, going back to Adam and Eve's disobedience. This inherited tendency, according to the source, makes humans naturally inclined towards, well, badness, including violent thoughts and actions. It contrasts this with God's original peaceful design for humans.
Okay, so an inherent human flaw. What's the second root cause?
Human government itself. The source's position is that God didn't design humans to rule themselves successfully without his guidance. It quotes Jeremiah, "It does not belong to man who is walking even to direct his step." So from this viewpoint, human political systems are inherently limited in their ability to bring about lasting global peace.
And within that point about government, it also mentions religion's role.
It does, and it's quite pointed. The source claims that many religions throughout history have actually condoned, justified, or even promoted warfare. It uses the symbolic term Babylon the Great to represent, in its view, these religions, and holds them responsible for much bloodshed, citing the Book of Revelation. Again, we're just stating the source's specific claim here.
Understood. Impartially reporting the source's view. And the third root cause.
This one involves unseen forces, Satan and his demons. The source quotes 1 John 5.1 quote, "The whole world is lying in the power of the wicked one, identifying that wicked one as Satan the devil. It describes him as having a murderous disposition and presents him and other rebellious spirit creatures as the primary hidden instigators behind war and violence globally."
So inherited sin, flawed human self-rule, and demonic influence. These are the deep roots, according to the source.
Exactly. And the source argues that because humans can't eliminate these fundamental causes on their own,
They can't eliminate war.
right, but then it pivots and says, God can.
And this is the core of the article's how W question, right? How war will end.
Precisely. The source is clear. The end of war will come through God's action, not human efforts. It quotes Psalm 46. He is bringing an end to wars.
Okay, so how does the source describe this happening? What are the steps?
Well, first, it says God will remove human governments. This happens via an event the Bible calls the War of Armageddon. Now, the source is careful to define Armageddon not as some chaotic, human-caused apocalypse, but as God's specific war to end all human wars and political rule, referencing Revelation.
So God intervenes to dismantle the existing political structures. What replaces them?
God's kingdom. The source describes this as a real, functioning government ruling from heaven that will succeed where human governments failed. It quotes Daniel saying this kingdom will never be destroyed.
And Jesus plays a key role.
The central role. The source identifies Jesus Christ as the king of this kingdom appointed by God. It mentions scriptures like Isaiah 9 and Matthew 28 about his authority, and it notes Jesus taught his followers to pray for this kingdom to come, indicating its importance in God's plan.
So the source then describes what life would be like under this kingdom rule.
Oh yes, in quite some detail. It pictures a world united under this one government led by Jesus. It highlights his fairness, no more discrimination based on race or nationality, which fuels so much conflict now. It says people won't have to fight for their rights because Jesus will personally ensure justice and rescue the vulnerable from oppression and violence, citing Psalm 72.
What about the actual weapons of war?
Gone. Micah 4.3 beats swords into plowshares. The source says deadly weapons will be eliminated, and it adds that people who refuse to live peacefully, the wicked, will be removed, ensuring genuine safety for everyone.
And the conditions people live in. The economic drivers of conflict.
Eliminated, according to the source, poverty, hunger, inadequate housing, gone. Instead, abundance of food, comfortable homes for all. It paints a picture of prosperity based on verses in Psalms and Isaiah.
That covers the physical aspects. But what about the deep scars of war? The trauma, the loss.
The source addresses that directly. It speaks of complete healing, physical, mental, emotional. It even talks about the resurrection of the dead back to life on earth, allowing families torn apart by war to be reunited. And it says the painful memories, the former things, will eventually pass away, quoting Revelation 21.
A complete restoration. And how does this kingdom tackle those root causes the source identified earlier? Sin, human rule, Satan.
That's crucial to its argument. It says God's kingdom will address them. Sin will be progressively eliminated as people learn God's ways and live by them, united in worshiping the God of peace. They'll be freed from its negative influence.
And the issue of human rule is solved
by God's kingdom replacing it entirely. One perfect, heavenly government instead of flawed human ones.
And the unseen instigators, Satan and the demons.
The source states God's kingdom will remove them completely, incapacitating them so they can no longer influence humanity or stir up conflict. With them gone, it says peace will finally abound.
The source sounds very confident about this outcome.
Extremely confident. It bases this confidence on God's attributes, his wisdom and power to actually do it, his motivation hating suffering and violence, and his faithfulness, arguing that God cannot lie and his promises are guaranteed to be fulfilled.
It's certainly a comprehensive, faith-driven vision for ending war presented in this source. But it also talks about finding peace now, doesn't it, before all that happens?
Yes, that's a key practical part. It circles back to those personal stories. Gary, the soldier, found peace of mind now, understanding why things are bad and trusting God's future solution.
Wilmar, who saw awful things.
He found comfort in God's forgiveness, citing Psalm 86, helping him cope with his past actions in war.
The fear with PTSD.
She found relief, trusting the Bible's promise that painful memories will eventually fade, which helped her manage her symptoms now.
And Alexander the refugee.
She draws comfort from the promise of future, lasting peace in Psalm 72, helping her endure the current nightmare.
Marie, the orphan from Rwanda.
Her hope is in the resurrection promise, believing she'll see her family again. That sustains her.
And Dollar, facing shortages.
He feels empowered knowing God sees the injustice and promises a future where the meek inherit the earth, helping him cope with present suffering. The source also explicitly states that these individuals, identified as Jehovah's Witnesses, actively apply Bible teachings to overcome hatred, racial, national, personal right now.
And it mentioned their neutrality.
Yes, it presents their refusal to take part in politics or violence as a direct application of their faith, contributing to their personal peace and unity.
And the community aspect.
It highlights the support they find within their worldwide religious community, using Alexander's experience of being welcomed and cared for by fellow witnesses when she fled as a refugee.
So the source argues the Bible offers not just a future hope, but practical help for peace and resilience today.
Exactly. A way to cope, find meaning, and build peaceful relationships even while conflict continues around them.
Which brings us full circle, really, back to those initial questions you, the listener, might have had when sharing this source with us. Why war if we want peace? Is peace possible now? Will war ever end?
And this specific source, An End to War How, gives its clear answers. Human efforts fall short because they don't tackle the deep roots, sin, flawed human rule, demonic influence as it defines them.
And the ultimate end to war, it argues, will come not from us, but from God's kingdom, which will address those root causes and bring lasting peace and healing.
And in the meantime, it suggests individuals can find personal peace, overcome prejudice, and find strength by applying Bible principles and finding support within their community.
The source itself invites further exploration, suggesting visiting the jw.org website, requesting a Bible study, attending meetings, or getting their book Enjoy Life Forever.
It's definitely a distinct perspective, grounding the solution entirely outside of human political or military systems.
It really is. And perhaps the thought to leave you with, drawn from this source, is considering the difference it portrays between human efforts aiming for maybe temporary truces or managing conflict, and its vision of a permanent, global, divinely accomplished peace.
And whether finding personal peace is truly possible, even now, amidst it all, based on the approach this source outlines.
Definitely food for thought.